Science diplomacy, sovereignty, strategy, and global race. I've been able to find the time to read it today, and it is a very useful report about equal importance of our event today. Might offer some observations on it myself. The best place to start is with the committee that has actually been a moment when she and Nora, the chair of the committee, and very good she to come and spend her time to support this event. We'll then hear from George Freeman, who is the deputy chair of the committee, and Emily Darlington enters on cue. Thank you so much for joining us, Emily, another member of the committee, and with a personal background and interest, particularly in international development. Professor Sir Peter Knight, and it's great that he has his role, main role, in developing and supporting and growing a quantum program over a decade now, on which we can learn and be quantum decided. And we'll then hear from Professor Charlotte Watts, Executive Director of Solutions and the Just Solutions Vision. And before that, of course, words take up the key. What I'm going to do is let's get rolling, and I think she and George are going to speak to you from the lectern. We'll also have a wider intervention from our other panelists as well. But it's an excellent report, and I'm so pleased to welcome the chair of the committee, Chair over to the lectern. Chi, over to you.
Thank you so much, David. Huge pleasure. Here, and get your interest in science, ability, and science politics, and really proud of today. Honor and privilege to chair Science, Innovation, Technology Select Committee, best select committee in the House, absolutely. And as well as hearing from George and Emily, I do know that we have some other fantastic council members of our committee. So we have we have Daniel Wagner there, Alison Governor there as well, and it is have so many, we have so much talent in education, science, medicine, communication, I'm very proud of chairing, but I'm also proud to be like the only chartered engineer in the House with over 20 years of experience in industry and 16 years as an engineer in Parliament. But as my friends, family, and also many of my colleagues can tell you, I am not a diplomat. And I have learned, let me say English, I have learned so much about diplomacy, both as an instrument and as a profession. And I do want to also give a particular thank you to the committee, so instrumental in collecting the evidence, shaping the report, and having a number of today. And my final thanks is to David and the Foundation for Science and Technology for organising for them and being forward here and our so our report, science focuses government strategy and global race. I want to emphasize that this football analogy wasn't important with Mexico. I don't have special recommend now. So what we say is that the UK is in the Premier League when it comes to scientific events. You're in the Premier League when it comes to our global diplomatic network. But we do not know where we stand when it comes to science. We launched our inquiry just over a year ago now to examine how the government should leverage scientific research and innovation for diplomatic goals, both missions and national security. We also examined whether the strategy do so is fit for purpose in the current geopolitical climate. And we decided to examine the strengths and weaknesses of UK climate diplomacy, then such a subject we wanted specific lenses to help us build out. Those lenses were health and life sciences, quantum, and space. Chose to focus on the UK government strategy, climate diplomacy, and its implications for sovereignty and research security, part of the wider topic, and believe with both sovereignty and so we had held 5 active sessions with ministers, policy experts, officials, former officials, and civil society. We spoke over 50 evidence and gathered evidence on lifetime investment as part of the separate environment that we had. As a committee, we wanted to express our thanks to everyone who so the report has 3 main points. Firstly, finding the UK failed to adapt to you may argue that that's the pace in geopolitics has been such and impossible to adapt to it. But I recognize that, but based and the basis of it, so we have to be able to build on our own diplomatic strategies. Well, to give examples of this, so we welcome the global talent fund set up in the wake of the difficult changes between talent in the UK, but it fails to capitalize on the US institution from science funding. And without suggesting the upfront costs faced by researchers, we find it unlikely to have impact that we desire. Of June 2020, 18 researchers have been announced as taking up new roles as part of it. That isn't really going to be anything. While the committee also recognises that overseas government spending has been reduced to allow the political investment in the wider budget, our report highlights some of the short-sighted nature of the efforts in this area and its impact, particularly on ODA or R&D. And a third example of the US pharmaceuticals, which is secured new benefits, notably redemption of talent, but it also appears to involve significant commitment, especially 4 elements of UK domestic policy, changes related to medicine spending, NICE threshold, and the voluntary scheme for branded medicine prices. Are key to the UK health policy. And although the notable link with the pharmaceutical sector inevitably means that trade negotiations will have an impact. This is about NHS spending, prices, and access to medicine should finally be driven by the need to balance the sustainability of science. Now that was our first point about basically keeping up with it. A second big point is the lack of an overarching strategy to find diplomacy, that is undermining the ambition. Witnesses consistently cited the strength of the states. We've also cited described departmental science and technology cabinet committees as a welcome step to joining across departments. But despite this, we find that the government is not articulated a strategic framework, setting out priority partners, technology, or intended outcomes for our partnership. The 6 frontier technologies, the digital technology sector plan, and the space, we say the government should bring forward detailed cross-government strategies accompanied by clear delivery plan, and forthcoming plan for space providing important opportunities. And the report also describes the government's approach to international scientific science diplomacy as opportunity. We are therefore calling on the government to bring forward a framework criteria for decisions on science partnership, engagement with the US, maybe the EU, the Commonwealth partner, and other mineral powers be competitive, such as Russia and China. Should improve how we intend to find technology sovereignty. Power development and how we intend to approach this unification. And thirdly, our third big point is that we're a global race of sovereignty, whether we acknowledge it or not. We heard from witnesses that sovereign capability is not something achieved in every area. And that the government should therefore be clear about its priorities, specific about what is achievable, and explicit about which capability it considers strategically important and setting out how to support them. So, you know, the US's decision to restrict access to some the most powerful AI models was a sort of a watershed moment in finding us that even close allies do not always provide reliable access to technology. And the government must be realistic about these risks when considering how to resolve them. So the own collaborating access framework, how some of the government thinks about sovereignty, the useful foundation for prioritizing approach to technologies currently apply which at too high a level guide effective decision making. And when we're looking at decision making, that's not only in government, in the public sector, but it's important that businesses know where the increased ambitions are, so that they can direct their focus and attract national finance for that. And we heard that some of you were consistent that you didn't want to, by setting out strategic ambitions, we would be alerting Russia and China to our weaknesses. I think we should be relatively certain that Russia and China are aware about businesses, startups, particularly, aren't aware of where they should direct their resources to garner government support and to. So, I want to also emphasize, especially by saying that the UK is highly successful in Western countries. We are highly successful at generating world-leading service innovation. But we would be less successful in turning that strength to the growth of high-tech companies. That result, too many technology is not commercialized overseas and further. Greater power by the government where together with by great access finance policy countries to help to resolve that. So, as I started by saying, in the American Premiership, we are excellent in research and innovation, and that is the advantage. Many other nations, why would they are more effective from the finding the learning stage? They don't have that advantage. Where country but just to stay in that, we are wanting to talk about signing the loan strategy. That strategy ensure signs and progress remain correct. I meant forward, both the driver of progress and the pillar of progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I was thinking the mic is working. Oh, not because we can. Sure. Very good.
Oh, no.
Everybody could hear you fine.
Ah,
2-2.
oh, wow.
Now, George, over to you.
Great.
Welcome. I hope we haven't given
given him an unfair advantage. He's now got the working mic, but you were very audible in the room. George.
Great, David, thank you. Thank you to the FST for filling a room with august scientists to talk about this. I'm going to share 3 quite provocative reflections with you, having battled for 15 years to try and get successive prime ministers, and boy, have they come and gone, to recognize that the only way we get out of debt and structural deficit and decline and the anger that goes with it is to harness properly our science to build the industries of tomorrow, to tackle the global challenges, and not to sit in a self-congratulatory silo that we're winning academic prizes. That doesn't cut the mustard in reform constituencies, and it doesn't help people around the world who are starving or can't heat their homes. I think the science community has become rather dependent on government handouts, and we've lost the voice to signal to people that it's science and research and evidence-based challenge that drove the Enlightenment. It liberated people in Europe from the tyranny of superstition and religion. Science unleashed is a force for innovation and for global opportunity. So I'm going to be a bit provocative. My first point is the intensity of the global race. So I had a 16-year career in venture capital before I came into government in 2010, with David Cameron, you remember, glibly reassuring the world that we were going to share the proceeds of growth, just when the crash meant that there weren't many proceeds of growth. And there was never any proper conservative, coherent thinking about how you deal with structural deficits and debt, and how really governments deal with that challenge. And I would argue that the reason 7 prime ministers have been knocked over in 10 years is that core challenge. When people get poorer, when they feel like the rest of the world is doing better, when they feel like migrants are coming here and getting the opportunities they're not, they get angry. So I think this is not just a kind of important conversation for scientists, it's an important conversation for the UK. And the intensity of the global race for sovereignty has intensified even quicker than the technology cycles, driven by, well, in my career, 2 major things. The pandemic, suddenly the world woke up to the foresight with which David and I and a few others launched that in UK life science strategy. Suddenly the world realized, oh my goodness, we all need to have our own sector. And boy, are they competing. We sadly went backwards after the pandemic in terms of pursuing the adoption of innovation through the NHS in the way that the pandemic showed was possible. China now investing massively, and it's quite clear they're looking to knock over American hegemony post-war based on the petrodollar, based on technology, and based on global security. The EU building a post-Brexit, post-Ukraine. We, the EU, must not allow ourselves to be blocked out by China and America. We must be an active bloc. And I think one of the big challenges for the UK is, are we in that bloc or not? And there are mixed signals. And that's why under Boris Johnson, who again instinctively got it, we set up the National Science and Technology Council, the equivalent of the National Security Council for Science and Technology. And in the integrated review, Para 1, we said that competing in the science and technology race was absolutely key to UK economic security and broader security. And that's where the Own Access Collaborate framework came from. So when you look at what other countries are doing, and you'll notice in our select committees, we're always asking UKRI or all our witnesses, who are the top 5 or 10 countries in the world? How much are they investing public? How much are they investing private? Are we competing? And how are we doing in that race? And if I told you 18 months ago that America would say it wanted to annex Greenland, that it wanted a free-for-all in the Arctic and the Antarctic, that it was no longer prepared to defend NATO. I mean, we live in a completely different world. So for me, science diplomacy line 1 is the UK going to stand up globally in that and take a position? And it seems to me that there are a group of nations, call them a new Commonwealth, from Canada to Norway to Switzerland, Singapore, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, who are not in the Beijing, Brussels or Washington bloc, but are deeply committed to harnessing science for global good. So I think we're in a completely different landscape, and we need to think a bit more like a startup, not a sort of complacent big company assuming that it's going to fall in our lap. And we need to think about where have we got USP and where do we really build those relationships. And that's why partly I came back to chair the all-party group for the Antarctic and Arctic. Nowhere speaks to the science diplomacy challenge more than the melting ice caps, British Antarctic Survey, special forces science, extreme environments, science for global good, while Chinese and Russian submarines and tankers are flying up and down, turning it into a commercial playground. So It's a really important front lines. Biosecurity, another one post-pandemic. When I went to Economic Security Cabinet, suggested we should have a biosecurity strategy, 24/7 surveillance in Canada, Netherlands, our ports, Australia, Singapore. The officials said, Minister, we have an economic security strategy, and produced a document that was 4 years old. So I'm a bit skeptical sometimes about strategitis and documents. And what we need by strategy is a muscular framework, a network of allegiances around the world. And research security is another one. And our research security is pretty shaky. And we need to get together with nations who believe in research security and back it. My second point is about the difference in multilateral and bilateral. We need to be able to walk and chew gum. So I was really proud. I used all my political capital, such as it was, to get us back into Horizon. But I also went off partly to appease those in the cabinet who said, hang on, couldn't we spend this 6 billion better to do global science, to develop the Pioneer program? Partly because I thought we should have our cake and eat it. We should be in Horizon and we should be doing global. And that's why I also went straight to Japan, Switzerland, Canada to negotiate and sign a strategic framework agreement, bilateral. And I'm really pleased the government have carried them on. And you'll have noticed that when we got back into Horizon, Ian Chapman and I negotiated for us to come out of Euratom and to spend that 600 million to accelerate our fusion moonshot. We have a chance to really lead the fusion race. I worry now we're moving too slowly. We've gone back to the speed of the slowest public sector procurement on STEP. Whereas the Americans, people in the Gulf, Southeast Asia were saying, if you boys are serious, if you're really going to build a fusion science park at Burton and build incubators, we'll invest. We'll back you. So some things are multilateral, some things are unilateral. Space debris, a good example. We launched here in the UK, the Astra Carter, and the space sector said, brilliant, can you make sure, Minister, that it's not just the UK? So I went to get Japan, Switzerland, Canada signed up. So I think we need to be able to recognize that some things require deep bilats, some things require multilats, and some things require full global partnerships. So on genomics, for example, I'd love us to set up a Commonwealth genomics program, tropical disease, tropical agriculture, we could give the Commonwealth a 21st century mission. So I think we're not thinking enough in our science debate in Whitehall about the front lines of this stuff. And my third point is the levers that we've got. If you're lucky enough to be UK Science Minister, it is incredibly humbling, probably as humbling as Andy Burnham's going to find when he discovers he's got the nuclear trigger and he meets the CDS and decides to have an election to get a mandate. When you go off as Science Minister, you discover around the world, we are viewed in this hostile environment as the people you trust. If it's Brits in science, they really trust us. They want us to chair the meetings. They want us to set the standards. And that's because I think we've got world-class universities, amazing research institutes. We overlook the PSRE sometimes, the British Antarctic Survey, the Met Office. These are bastions of global respect. Our charities, from Wellcome to the tiny patient charities. But I'd also put a shout in, David, for regulatory leadership. And I'm so pleased that you're chairing RIO, the Regulatory Innovation Office. My argument there was, look, if we set the standards for these in test beds and sandboxes, that's diplomacy. People trust the Brits. And if you set the standards, you've got half a chance to own the investment. And training and fellowships. It seemed to me for ages that if you how are you going to be a science power on a shoestring? We'll get the best scientists here young, and they'll fall in love with something, somewhere, or someone. And those fellowships are really key. We're not going to compete with the big companies on the biggest and most expensive mid-career, but get them in here early, and you have a chance. We've done it time and time again. So some thoughts. I think the global race is intensifying. We're not thinking strategically enough about allegiances and allies, and we're slightly playing one club golf, and we need to be a bit more agile and think about how we use our levers in different markets to build supply chains, resilience, and research collaborations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, George. We're now going to hear from Emily Darlington, MP for Milton Keynes Central, which is one of my favourite places for council driving innovation. And with some if you want to see a pavement robot at work, go to Milton Keynes, and who also has quite strong views about sovereignty and sovereign capabilities in areas such as AI. So, Emily, over to you. I don't want the mic here. I want to go to the lectern, whichever we prefer. Right.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, David. As you said, I am the MK for Milton Keynes Central. I used to be deputy leader of the council and also used to be, under the David Sainsbury years, the special advisor on science, innovation and tech. And in some ways, when we kicked off this inquiry, for me, I very much felt we hadn't properly talked about where we sit. It's not just about what Britain's doing. It is about what the rest of us are doing. And for the first time, I think we really felt the impact of that when we left Europe and we had that time outside of research collaborations, but also the fact that we had the ODA cuts, which was also ending research collaborations, costing research jobs here in the UK, but also putting us in a precarious position in terms of life sciences research funding, which of course is amplified through that some of that ODA funding. We were withdrawing from answering some of the biggest of the world's questions, where Britain had always been at the centre of delivering and working with partnerships and building capacity in other countries, because we have a very different view than the Americans and the Chinese and the Russians when it comes to research. It isn't just about us doing research in other countries, it's us building collaborations, and that leaves a legacy of skills and research in those countries. And we leave them, hopefully, now, post-colonial years, better off than where we found them. And those ODA cuts for me really hit hard, having worked in several countries where we see the results of these collaborations. And the fact that it was felt politically that there was no cost, or publicly that there was no cost to these cuts. There was no cost to British science, and there was no cost to the British public. In reality, everyone in this room knows that there is. We have put ourselves more at risk in terms of the research we were doing in terms of feeding the world, and we're doing a specific inquiry on that now on the Science, Innovation and Tech Committee, which is fascinating, where British science is actually really solving some of these problems with climate change and actually being able to grow vegetables. And we know it's hunger and scarcity drive conflict. Conflict drives migration. So quite frankly, you would think reform would be at the very forefront of arguing that we should be funding these partnerships and this research if they really want to achieve their no net migration. But the other thing that I wanted to think about was, what is our soft power? Right? Because we don't talk about our soft power. We're very British, and we don't really talk about and boast about what we have and the powers that we have within them. Now, I'm very lucky to have BSI in my constituency. And many people who have seen me before know I absolutely go on and on about how BSI is one of our biggest soft powers in the world. Because if we are the ones setting the standards, and those standards get adopted internationally, and companies and research that starts here have that added advantage, we are already on the way. Yet, and I think it was, not great, but they're still seen as very separate from government. Now, I don't necessarily want them to be government funded, but they are integral to everything that we are trying to achieve. Everything we are trying to achieve about growth in every region in this nation, in this country, but also growth around the world. How is that sustainable? How is that done to support people and not to support profit makers? How is that done to actually solve problems? How are we confident that the toys we give our children, as well as the devices that we allow our elderly parents to use, are safe? It's all done through standards. It's all done also through regulations. And as was mentioned before, I just want to reemphasize this point. Any conference you go to, from national weights and measures to whatever it might be, they might sound like, some of you might attend some of those conferences. They might not sound exciting to the British public, but it is about giving us not just an economic advantage, but a scientific advantage. And it is where people look to Britain. We are the trusted interlocutor. We always have been, from the point that we set up the BSI 100 years ago, or the fact that we first established Greenwich Mean Time, right? These are things that we are known for and for. But we also have a network of countries around the world that want us to be the partner, are crying out for us to be the partner. They don't want, particularly you look at areas of Africa, who don't want the Russian or particularly the Chinese experience that they're having, where they build you a road and expect to have your mineral rights in perpetuity. What they want is real and true partnerships so that they're lifting a nation. That is where we really need to be thinking about. So where science diplomacy for me comes to the crux is, yes, we have to talk about the benefits of Britain, because we are in a world where voters, your families, your friends want to know what it means for them, but we don't ever communicate that. What does it mean for them? Well, it means that you're less likely to get another coronavirus. We had that scare about Ebola. Luckily, it turned out to be wrong, but we had a scare about Ebola for the first time in the UK, in a UK hospital. People seem to understand what they went through. They understand that it travels around the world, but they forget what are the mechanisms in order to get there, to prevent that from happening. And the mechanisms in order to stop that from coming to the UK again is for our science and research to be working with science and research in those countries to develop the solutions that mean it never travels. We are on the precipice of being able to end HIV and AIDS. We are on the precipice of being able to end tuberculosis. We're almost there on polio. British science has been in each and every one of those, yet we fail ever to talk about it. So for me, science, and I think actually departments fail to understand it. You talk to the Department of Health about its virus, what is its strategy? It doesn't talk about the long-term prevention, which is science diplomacy. When you talk to the Foreign Office about increasing our influence in these countries around the world, they don't talk about science being the way we build those partnerships. They don't talk about science being the way we build collaborators instead of conflict. And when you talk about the Home Office and through to any other department, DEFRA and its challenges in terms of farming, don't talk about British science helping us actually become more food self-sufficient. We don't talk about it in terms of energy and climate change. It's not just about our adaptations, but it's about adaptations around the world. What can we learn from other countries that are even more at the forefront than we are in this sweltering heat? So for me, I hope that this report, and I think I can speak on behalf of the whole committee, I think the ambition of the committee is this report starts to open up eyes across government and say, this doesn't sit with DCIT, this sits with the British government. And what role the British government wants to play as it takes those steps that it's already taken in the last 2 years back onto the global stage. And if science is not a part of that, it makes both us poorer and the world poorer. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Emily. Peter, Professor Sir Peter Knight, FRS, is chair of the UK National Quantum Technology Programme Strategy Advisory Board. So that's a mouthful, but he has been involved in quantum and shaping the quantum strategy from its beginning. And of course, an area where a decision has been taken that we should have a sovereign capability in quantum. Peter, over to you.
Okay, so my background, I'm a physicist by background. And in terms of my international engagement, I'm a former president of the Optical Society of America in Washington, but also of the Institute of Physics here in the UK. But I've been looking after and encouraging quantum in the UK for more than a decade now. So throw some numbers at you. UK has about 1% of the world's population, but it has 13% of the world's highly cited papers. So scientifically, we're punching way above our weight on this one, but we need to think about how to translate that science excellence into economic advantage for our citizens as well. Now, in 1990, at the end of the Cold War, the US had 26% of the global economy. It also owned about 25% of the global assets in the world. By 2025, the US still had about 25%
of the global economy, but 50% of the global assets. In the meantime, Japan and Europe have declined in terms of their shares, and China dramatically increased. Okay. Now, if we look at how to translate that science into economic advantage, 8 US companies were founded in the last 50 years with a value of more than $1 trillion. No European companies founded in that same time interval has been valued at more than 100 billion. Okay. So as a driver of investment, it's that massive investment opportunity that the United States presents, which is one of our challenges. Now look at collaboration around the world. And again, if I look at the G7 and the G7 scientific outputs, papers that are published and so on, about half of the outputs from the G7 involve scientific collaboration with other nations. Okay, 11% in the UK, for example, 11% with China, 19% with the US, and 10.5% with Germany. And postgraduate numbers form a very large proportion of our scientific workforce here in the UK from around the world. It's an important engine of soft power where we've really influenced people around the world. Okay, so now let me turn to the quantum side a bit, because what we tried to do in quantum is to do something a little bit different from what we've tried in the past, of bringing together the science community, the industrial community, the investment community, other government departments as a user in a coherent and coordinated platform for this. So we're in our 12th year. It involves 30 universities and over 100 companies. And in that time, we can see that we built a quantum technology strategy. And one of the things that I think really is worth noting is that we linked the strategy to a budget. So you could implement something. Okay. There are many strategies that sit on shelves until a budget arrives. We linked it together. Okay. So how did we do? We're second in startups after the United States. I can't resist this one. We have a startup in Emily's constituency in Milton Keynes called DigiStain, using quantum imaging, which is transforming our ability to diagnose breast cancer, for example. So second to only to the US in terms of startup. Second, in terms of venture capital investment after the US, our industrial leverage, taxpayers' money in, industry investment in at the same time, is running at around 3 to 1. Okay, this is already a sign that we're getting buy-in to people to see that journey towards exploitation. And the report that you've got in front of you stresses the own collaborate access, the OCA. I think it's a useful way of focusing the mind, but we need the tools to implement OCA. This is the problem. We can talk about the generic framework for it, but in quantum, we've actually begun to work out ways in which we have tools to implement, own, collaborate. So one of the things that we've been doing is, how do we get stuff sticky in the UK? How do companies grow? Okay, we've had a number of quantum unicorns grow. Unicorns, in other words, valuation of over $1 billion. Okay. Making them sticky in the UK is really important for us. So ignore it all. Right, good. We have a procure program. Everything in quantum, by the way, has to have a Q in the word. I am not to blame for procure with a Q. Okay. And this is, how do we use government investment to procure product so that users can actually see what it would do for their part of the economy? People mentioned standards earlier. BSI, of course, is very much in the heart of all this. So is the National Physical Laboratory. Now, if we develop a new technology, working out about how that technology is interoperable with other things is really important. For example, we're going to have to make sure that in optical communications that involve also quantum, these things are right. So we need to talk to the regulators in this one. Sadly, there are over 100 standards committees worldwide in quantum, all manned by volunteers. And one particular state actor is packing those standards bodies to the benefit of their own environment. So working out how we professionalize Western nations' contribution to the formation of standards is really important. We have a quantum development group that was set up with like-minded nations that led by the US, Canada, and many other friends. Lancaster House was the venue for the most recent one, where soft power, I think, is already being identified as things that we could work on. Now, there are risks in all of this. Research security is really important. And again, I think that quantum has actually pioneered something on this space, in particular working with NPSA. Who in the room knows what NPSA is? Blimey. Okay. NPSA is a branch of MI5, used to be called CPNI, and it works very closely with us on how to provide advice on cyber protection, physical protection, and the protection of your IP. And working very closely with our ecosystem, this has been really transformative, being alert to that, coming out of the shadows and providing that research security advice. So what are the issues? Scale up capital, making it sticky, something that we really desperately need to work out how to get our companies to grow from the billion to the hundreds of billions. We need to worry about infrastructure investment. We need to make sure that other government departments see how transformative this technology is, so getting that involved as well. And now finally, how do we work with our allies? The allies, the Five Eyes, obviously, NATO, with a very large quantum portfolio of things now, working with Europe, working with Japan, South Korea, Switzerland. All of these are really important for us in the way that we can actually exert ourselves. Working with countries around the world, I can never remember the name of the organization now. I'm going to call them the SIN network, the Sinners. Okay, the Sinners provide an extraordinary intelligence around the world of how to link the UK in science innovation back with the UK. And I think it's something that could be explored and exploited much more strongly. So we have a worked example in quantum. I could have rolled it out in photonics, for example. My usual statement to finish with on photonics: it generates more for the GDP of the UK than pharmaceuticals. Who knew that, apart from Andy? Okay, it's an engine of prosperity for us. Okay, so we've got an industrial machine, a powerhouse of intellectual excitement, and the beginnings of mechanisms to do it. What we've done in quantum could be rolled out in a number of other areas, in engineered biology, for example, in robotics, you name it. There are ways in which you could build that ecosystem. But I think quantum is a good example of how we've punched above our weight. How do we make sure that we reap the benefits of all of that work without it all migrating through investment to the United States? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. And now let's hear from Professor Charlotte Watts, formerly the Chief Science Advisor in the Foreign Office, now Executive Director at Wellcome Trust. Charlotte, over to you.
Great, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be able to reflect on the report, but it's also quite hard when everybody's made your points when you come last. But I might repeat a few, but I wanted to kind of share some perspectives, having spent 9.5 years in government as a chief scientist. So I'm an epidemiologist by training, spent my career in international global health, then went into DFID as the chief scientist, then to FCDO as the chief scientist, and now at Wellcome, head of solutions. And actually, a lot of what I'm doing now in Wellcome was elements of what I was doing in government, which is saying, how do we use the power of science and partnerships to really tackle some of the big problems that the world faces? But also then, how do we work with others? Because actually, we can talk about diplomacy in terms of soft power. We can talk about collaboration, this own access, collaborate. But actually, the big thing is collaboration. the UK has excelled in science and is strong in science, not only because we've got many brilliant scientific minds and brilliant universities, but it's been that culture of openness and of collaboration. If you go into any lab in the UK, it's incredibly diverse. And it will have brilliant scientists from Europe, from Asia, from China, from Africa. And it's that openness and that ability to collaborate that essentially has meant that we have been strong. And it's what we need to recognize. And it was, especially when you think of science, there are some areas we need to protect, but actually there are many areas. The way we accelerate progress is being prioritized and deliberate, but it's also through the collaborations that we support. And so what I think is sometimes uncomfortable when we think about how does the UK make progress, actually some of them in their own collaborate access is actually, there's a major element is around collaboration. And so I was always, when I talked to Patrick Vallance about that framework, I was saying, can we put collaboration first and then own and access after? And actually, if you go and talk to somebody, go, I want to work with you, but I'm going to own it. That's not a great kind of selling point to actually why we might want to work together. So there is always that sense of how do we get the detail right and the balance between actually being secure when we need to be secure. How do we try and get IP and other methods to protect intellectual property, but also get that collaboration muscle really working in very deliberate ways across the different geographies? I'm completely off script here, so I'm trying to decide where I go next in this conversation. I really liked, and Chi, you mentioned this, the World Cup, and we've got the Premier League quote that you have at the end of the report. And what I liked not only is that you were talking about the Premier Division of Science, but also the Premier Division of Diplomacy. And actually having spent particularly the last 5 years before I moved into Wellcome, understanding more about that diplomatic muscle and how powerful it is. And it includes the science. It was SIN, and then it became STIN, or Science, Innovation and Technology Network, because they were doing a lot on tech and science, if I got it wrong. Anyway, but that actually is part of the diplomatic. We're having a debate. Somebody from the audience hopefully can correct us on getting the right name. But it was basically this overseas international network of scientists, and people understood the ecosystems in which they're based, which formed a very powerful and forms a very powerful intelligence network, but also enables universities, innovators to find the right collaboration so that they can accelerate their progress. So that diplomatic muscle is actually for the UK quite different than many other countries. When I used to go to around the world, that's the SIN network, but also the network of chief scientific advisors who are in every government department, were what other countries were trying to emulate along with our universities. And it's all of those elements, I think, that if you're thinking about the science and diplomacy opportunity, it's making sure we're paying attention and valuing some of those slightly behind the scenes muscles and expertise and skill sets that are really important. And I'm stressing that because actually many organizations many government departments are having to make headcount savings. They're having, if I look at the Foreign Office, they are making major reorganization decisions right now. And actually the risk we have is some of that specialized expertise doesn't get protected because, as a number of people rightly said, sometimes science doesn't get the attention and priority as a diplomatic issue. Yet every country you go to in the world, and I've been to many in my old job, want to collaborate with the UK on science. I can see the opportunity, and that reflects the breadth of expertise, the strength of our universities, the strength of our private sector, but also the way that universities end up collaborating, which is a very different culture to many others. I think the third point I want to say is we've heard a bit about competitive advantage, but I come from health. I've got a job that's about finding solutions. If I look at global health, the contribution that the UK has made to that, and that's been through research investments made by UKRI, by Department of Health and its international funding, by FCDO, as well as leveraging funding from Wellcome Trust. We are a major funder in the UK, and are very proud to partner with the UK in many shared international collaborations as well as UK ones, but also leveraged in significant fundings, for example, from the Gates Foundation, so from other philanthropies. And that has been because of that commitment, particularly in global health, to say, how do we solve the big pressing problems? So at the moment, for example, I've just come off here from a call on Ebola. We have the third most significant Ebola outbreak happening in DRC. We don't have a vaccine, we don't have a therapeutic, and we don't have a treatment. So the R&D gaps are absolutely massive. And that's where the breadth of UK expertise has a really important international role to play along with pharma. So for example, there was a trial that started 2 days ago, which is enrolling and testing a therapeutic for Ebola. That study is led by Oxford University, along with Congolese collaborators, WHO. That's an indication of the sorts of things that our science base can do. It's really tough to do a treatment trial in DRC in the middle of an Ebola outbreak. But it's the sort of skill sets and commitments that I think makes the UK stand out. And it's that actually we're not scared to take on big challenges. And actually, we have experts who can, in rapid time, make advances on really pressing problems and at pace. So the football analogy says we're in the Premier League. I think and it's highlighted the impact of many, I think, bad calls. The calls around the visa costs, the short-sightedness of the ODA cuts, and particularly the ODA R&D cuts that have been disproportionate. And when we look at the changing context and how that's reflected, I mean, if we look now at China, its academic output has increased by 22% in a year. It's now conducting more clinical trials than the US. We also have a range of other emerging science powers and leaders who have particular niches that they're excelling in, that are actually managing to translate their science innovation into growth opportunities. So I think we're at risk of relegation. Sorry, just to get on the football theme. And it's because I think the pressures, because of that lack of strategy, the wider context, if I look at the pressures on UK universities, our funding is not covering the true costs of research, plus the increasing opportunity but competitiveness around the world. But actually, it's a time when this report, it's great. We're going to have a new Prime Minister very soon. And I do hope that some of the key messages, but also the opportunity of actually what this report is telling us can be taken forward and help shape the new international strategy that the new leadership will bring in. So I hope it's going to be timely and that actually this will get noticed and listened to as new policies and ultimately as spending review might happen in months to come. So I'll end there, but thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Charlotte. Now, I would normally also invite our participants online to put questions on, but I'm having technical difficulties in accessing the Q&A. So I'm looking at Alex to help me. If there are people who wish to participate online via Slido on number 1428861, and if we have questions there which are not showing up on my laptop, Alex will help me. But we have a fantastic group of people physically with us. And I think we've only got Chi until about 20 past. So let's crack on with some questions, and I'll from people here physically with us. And I see we got several questions. Let's take these two in the front, and there's also a hand far at the back. So I'll take those three, and then we'll move to the other side. Yeah.
My name is John Dewdney, formerly of the British Antarctic Survey. And it's really a comment I wish to make to you, which is that the Antarctic Treaty and Antarctic science is a remarkable and long-lived example of diplomacy and science working together in synergy. And Britain plays a preeminent part in that, both in the science, where recent study has shown that the British Antarctic Survey is the preeminent institution in the world, and the part that Britain plays in the Antarctic Treaty. I think it's a great success story, and we should congratulate ourselves for it. Thank you.
That's the kind of intervention we like. Yes, and I have to say, there is a big argument that when it comes to the moon, with rival lunar bases being set up, we should learn from the Antarctic model. That is the way to handle space science as well. There was a question, yes, along there, yeah.
Fiona Clowder. I originally started my career with the research councils, which Peter might not remember, but my first job was helping with the quantum nonlinear and solid state optics initiative. But I later went to the Foreign Office and set up the Science Innovation Network. It's very encouraging to hear some of the comments, some of the progress, and some of the vision about this strategy. But this also reminds me of conversations 25 years ago when I set up the network. And so my question is, how do we address this point of urgency that came out? How do we link this to our commercial priorities so we're not having a similar conversation in 25 years' time, but we're celebrating some of that success? And key to that has to be about getting industry involved in this conversation. So how can we better do that?
Right, we'll come to, and I have to say it is an excellent network, and we're a bit confused now. It's been renamed the Science and Technology Network. Many of us still think of it happily, as Peter was saying, as the SIN network, and it is a fantastic national asset. And I think there was a question at the back. Yeah.
Yes, I'm an academic at the University of East London. So English Premier League is an excellent example of a system that produces fantastic players.
Sorry, which system? I couldn't hear that.
English Premier League is a fantastic example which produces fantastic players because people are focused on training and performing. If these people were doing non-training activities for a very long time, that same thing would happen. Most academics that I speak to now spend so much time applying for funds where they have such low probability of success. So I was wondering whether that's something that anybody has a comment on and it's something we can do about.
So we've got a question about the SIN network and urgency, and kind of related to that, a question about whether too much time is being wasted in the endless cycle of grant applications. Chi, I think you must comment as chair of the committee. Let's start with you.
Thank you very much. Two excellent questions. So in terms of the urgency, 25 years ago, that was 2000. I was elected in 2010. When I was first elected, I went through a sort of period of mourning for my engineering career because technology in engineering were not part of the world in which the parliamentary discussion and debate in any kind of significant way. The only issues about technology I got in my inbox were about, like, why haven't we got better broadband coverage? Now, not only is science and technology sort of a key, this is the sort of the point that the report does make, it's a key part of so many critical economic questions as reflected in the modern industrial strategy, but also security questions. And so I suppose, I recognize what you're saying and I recognize the challenge, but I was at the Munich Security Conference in February. And science, science diplomacy, sovereignty and science diplomacy were effectively the biggest issues there. So I think, and another, just to bring it back to my constituents again, this is the first time in my 16 years in Parliament that geopolitics is on the doorstep. That people are asking questions about our security and about what allies can we rely on and how is our defense investment and how are we going to, how are we secure against Russia? So I think that because of the pace of the global race, as we say, because of the urgency of our economic and defense security, I do think that we have greater cut through politically. But I'm not going to guarantee that this report will be first on Andy Burnham's to-do list, but it will certainly be in his inbox. And then I think the point about the English Premier League, the players simply play and train, that does show where one gets to when pushing in an analogy too far. But I think one of the things you're saying is that we emphasize that we are a world leading science power. It's one of those things that if we don't continue to, we could lose it if we don't continue to fight for it. And understanding what enables us to maintain, having the powers that, the fact that so many countries want to collaborate with us, that we have 13% of the world citations, etc. Maintaining that, building on that in an increasingly competitive environment, does mean ensuring that scientists have some time to do science. And I'm sure that that is recognized.
Now, any other quick comments?
First, just to back you up completely, that yes, British Antarctic Survey should not only be our blueprint for the moon, it should also be involved in near space, which is of course an increasingly contested world, both militarily and scientifically. I just want to take the Premier League analogy. I'm not a football fan, but what I do understand is the Premier League has widespread public support, and it is part of the British identity. So if we can get science to also be part of our British identity and the very public, then we'll be winning.
I just want to talk about own goals, and and that for me is basically the issue around visas, and how do we, really be welcoming to talent that comes to the UK, and some of the issues highlighted in the report for me are own goals.
It's a shocking figure in the report for the number of people who have actually come in on this new program that we're going to attack scientists who would otherwise have gone to the US. 18. Yeah. I remember that big announcement. Any quick comments before we get to the next round?
I want to come back to this comment about spending much of your working life applying for grants. What I think would really help is we started to look at larger, longer, LOLAs, in other words, on this one, so that you don't spend a disproportionate amount of your working life doing the grant application, but longer periods of funding to achieve something of substance. What I'd like to point out is how very effective the university research fellowships are administered by the Royal Society. They give our absolutely stellar leaders in science 8 years at a very early stage to pioneer their own area. They're not slaves of the business, and they can be transformative. So the URFs, I think, are a magnificent example of larger, longer, making sure that you identify. Of course, the success rate of getting a URF is quite low, but it is extraordinary.
Good point. Yes, George.
I just want to excuse me, to pick up Fiona's question on the sinners. Firstly, thank you for finally I've met the person who founded the SIN network. I think it's a really important question. How do we put more pace, urgency, and dynamism into that network? And I don't think it's their fault. I think politically, we haven't set out a clear enough strategy, which is what the report sets out. So when as minister, I went off to see the SIN network. By the way, one of the things, like reshuffling ministers all the time and civil servants all the time, we shuffle the sinners too often. The better ones are the ones who've been out in territory for a long time. They'll know more than most about it. But I think if we set a clear strategy, we want to use our science base to tackle food security. Globally, it's a priority to tackle, to build supply chains in quantum. And then said to the SIN network, your job is to help us do that. Give them a clear ambition and plan. I think they could respond. At the moment, it's, the soft power, I think the science sector does really well. We score highly. The real issue in this global race is on defense, on vaccines, on British Antarctic Survey, on Ebola, on space debris. These are big here and now challenges. And I don't think we're giving the SIN network a clear enough mandate to really help secure some outcomes.
Lots of hands going up, and I'm going to take quite a few interventions now. Let's just have a look across here, which I wasn't looking at before. Right, so there's some in the middle. The lady here and then the lady in green. Yes, those two first, and then we'll move along. Yep. Right. Okay. Let's start with these two and then the right. Yep.
Budget, and so we get to design the program to cover all our bases. So we work with governments across all four UK nations to open up access to administrative data research. We also fund free or very, very cheap training use the population level research. Because without that training, create these assets, nobody can use. Other programs, so my colleague here is Smart Data Research UK, they were funded through the Digital Research Infrastructure Fund. That specifies some infrastructure you cannot from the training. So they are trying to deliver a program to open up smart data, so data collected from electronic devices and without the budget to train people.
Right. Very good point about training. Thank you very much. Yes.
I'm Dame Helen Atkinson. I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor at Cranfield. And Leon Terry, who's my colleague, and I, we've been doing science diplomacy today, haven't we, Leon? We've had a very senior visitor from Australia, and a group of UK universities have got together with a group of Australian universities to generate a joint PhD programme. The Australians, as far as I can make out, have got direct access to government money, both national and federal, the local one, to actually put into this joint defence-orientated PhD programmes. We cannot see at the moment how the UK is actually engaging in this. We, the UK universities, are doing all the sorting out of the local industrial funding to enable this. And you just ask yourself, this is a Five Eyes partner. We really should be doing something with them on the defence research agenda. And where is the support from our diplomatic network?
Thank you. Now, did I miss a question on this side? Oh, yes, gentleman there. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I am a product of the British academic soft power. I mean, I came here from Southern Italy to do my master's degree, my PhD, and now I'm extremely proud to be a professor at a British university. However, increasingly, talking about international diplomacy, when I travel around, I was in China a couple of weeks ago, people ask me about the number of British universities that are affected by funding issues, sustainability issues, large-scale restructuring that seem to be treated in this country as kind of individual case studies rather than as a systemic issue of sustainability of the sector, and that has got implication nationally, but even in terms of diplomacy, in terms of attracting people and in terms of the sort of ideas about to what extent the sector is supported in the UK. So I'd like to hear what's the...
There is a very important question there about sustaining an ecosystem as distinct from having specific priorities that are that shape everything. Yes, now there's another question there. Yeah. We've got some more coming in. Good.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Charlotte Glass. I'm Head of Evaluation for the Science and Technologies Facilities Council. It's a very interesting time right now. I very much welcome the development of a strategy for science diplomacy, in particular the point that you made about having clear outcomes, clear expected objectives. One of the things that I really struggle with from an evaluation perspective is if I'm expected to collect evidence of science diplomacy benefits being realised, what were you expecting to happen in the first place? My question for you really is, where's the question and also a proposal? One is about then kind of, do you have in mind kind of clear indicators, clear measures of things that you actually expect to see. In the short term, we can see that in the long term, but what's the kind of short term that where I should be looking to measure? And the second point is, I think there's a huge opportunity here for us to leverage DSIT's meta science unit to task them with collecting evidence of this historically and also going forward into the future and thinking again about this idea of implementing a new strategy. We always need to be able to demonstrate what the impact of that strategy has been. And I think there's an opportunity there for the meta science unit to step up and provide some evidence.
Thank you very much. And by the way, I should apologise. There has definitely been some technical issues for people on Slido. It looks to me as if the Slido is now taking Q&A for people who are trying to participate online. And I'm sorry, it didn't appear to be working in that way earlier. There are a lot. I think, as this is, you'll understand that the panelists are not all going to answer every question. On the other hand, there's a real set of important points being made that people want to. The panelists themselves will want to listen and learn from. So I hope it's okay if we carry on collecting these observations. Yep, a couple there. Then we'll move across there. Yep. Yeah.
Andy Sellers, University of Southampton. Thank you for the shout out, Sir Peter. Big fan of the SIN network, the Sinners. Disappointed they were rebranded as the Stanners. My question actually is about aligning bilateral funds. So when you get bilateral collaborations in process, they're extremely powerful, but quite often it feels like pendulous swinging at different frequencies. So other governments, other countries have got their own timing, and how do we better align them to make sure that we actually capitalise on the opportunities? Thank you.
Very good. Do you want to pass the microphone along? Yeah.
Hi, Melissa Uchida, particle physicist, AI consultant. I feel you. Yeah, so I kind of had a point that sort of crosses a lot of the questions and the points. So Charlotte, you spoke a lot about the importance of collaboration, and Emily, we're talking about a lot about the impact globally and keeping people. And Professor Knight, of course, speaking there about the quantum sector. Now, me personally was one of the recipients, Nature paper just out, by the way, Nature cover, Aon, big plug, thank you.
Yeah, good.
Of that quantum funding. But one thing that we did is we made a really great collaboration within the UK and overseas, because everything I ever do is overseas, as particle physics is. And really great research came out of it, Nature cover. But a number of my colleagues are now, because what happened was that great fund, as you said, George, you need to have something that's funded, not just a strategy. But then all of a sudden the pendulum swings and the funding goes away. And okay, now we're funding Quantum Computing Centre, but that's not what the quantum research funding funded. It's not what I worked in sort of quantum optics. And so a number of the people, the expertise that were trained, have now moved overseas. We've literally lost, I mean, I can name 7 people who've moved overseas in the past 6 months. And it's not anyone's fault, right? It's not a criticism, but what I'm sort of trying to say is this is exactly what we're talking about here. We need to find a way where we have a sustainable ecosystem where, okay, we can fund things for a long time, but where there is space for, for innovation, because most of the sort of core research scientists, we don't want to do a sort of business style, building something a little bit better and a little bit more efficient every time. We want to do the moonshots. We're there to innovate. We're there to do something which no one has ever done before, to answer a big challenge. And the benefit of that is we think out of the box. But we need to then collaborate with someone who can turn that into GDP. And of course, the fusion sector is something that's done that. How do we do this and sustain this?
That's a very fair question. Do you want to give that to the lady behind you? Yep.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Rachel Guberman-Hill. I'm co-chair of the UK Committee on Research Integrity. I'm also at the University of Bristol, and I co-chaired one of the very first meta-science funding panels. So thank you for mentioning meta-science. As the UK Committee on Research Integrity, we're really interested in the very clear fact that matters such as rigour and in transparency and openness in our us to be thinking about is how everybody in the public can feel like a scientist. So I'd be really interested to know from you what you think we should be doing as a research community to enable that to happen so that everyone feels that science belongs to everybody and that science is owned by everybody. I'd like to know what we should be doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As Chi has to go very soon, I'm going to pause now for final comments from Chi, and we'll then collect the final interventions and have the panelists giving their final observations. Anything you want to say before you head off?
Well, just quickly, I'm actually going to talk about, well, the point I made about Australia and defence, because AUKUS, which is the great UK, Australia, US collaboration, and AUKUS 1 is looking at a specific submarine development, but AUKUS Pillar 2 is about more general research collaboration. And I think I'm still supporting your point in that there was confusion as to what AUKUS Pillar 2 is still. And there's clearly collaboration that's happening that could perhaps be part of that or should require extra support, but there isn't a sort of joined up connection there. So I think that's part of what we're saying in the report is that we need to have a clearer and more strategic ambitions or strategies for science diplomacy in specific areas, which would enable existing sort of the unjoined up part of bits of government to come together more effectively. And just the other thing I wanted to say before I go, this debate and it shows the number of different issues which feed in to our scientific strengths and therefore our sort of scientific diplomacy. But I do want to just reflect on, the issue about measurements. You have to know what you're trying to achieve so that you know what to measure. And so if we can have, there's a number of recommendations in the report which talk about strategy, but they also talk about measurable measures and identifying that measures. And my view, I'm not a data scientist, but with AI should make collecting data easier. But we don't seem to be using it more effectively in our government strategies as yet. So on that hopeful note, but we will do.
Thank you very much, Chi. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. And what we'll do now, there was a few, I think there's some other hands up. Brief interventions from the remaining hands up, and starting with the lady at the back there. And then we will have final, judicious, brilliantly considered observations from our panelists. Right. No, yes.
Thank you. Magdalena Skipper, Editor-in-Chief of Nature. Congratulations on the Nature cover. It's a deal. My question is a little bit broader. So science diplomacy, arguably, what it was at its strongest about 80 years ago, post-war, last century. It was a very different world then. Today, we talk about science diplomacy, how it can help align the world, but the world is very different, in a very different place. So my question is how science diplomacy today needs to be different from the way it was last century.
Very, very good question. And I think, yeah, we've got some other interventions here. We've got a really lively and engaged audience, but with a lot of expertise here. If you pass it along behind you, that's right. I think there are two questioners there. Yep.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good evening. I'm Gareth Hart. I'm a research scientist at Johnson Matthey. It's a short one. I saw recently that the Cabinet Committee for Science and Technology was renamed into Digital and Technology. Now, we can't be fearing name changes, but do we fear what's next? Is science moving out too far?
Yeah, and that's in the report and with a diminished shrunken membership as well. Yep.
Thank you. Jaideep Gupta, the Arts and Humanities Research Council at UKRI. Emily, just to pick up on your latter point on science being part of UK identity, I thought that was a profound point. So just a comment on the role of our cultural institutions here, our galleries, libraries, archives, museums. They seem to be quite central to how UK tells its story, but they're important. It's not just about them holding our collections, our data, expertise, but also public trust.
Thank you. And then, yes, if you pass the microphone forward to the gentleman there, and then I think there's a couple of, yep, we've got some other along here, yep.
Hi, I'm a PhD student at Oxford University. Just as a perhaps an opinion on sort of what we're saying about grants over there from someone who's quite a lot less important and doesn't decide anything. Part of science diplomacy seems to be attracting a talent abroad and also maintaining homegrown talent so it doesn't go elsewhere. Part of that is quality of life of researchers and continuity of research. So when PhD students and postdocs, or certainly PhD students, are paid minimum wage and then spending a lot of their time as postdocs jumping around collaborations, they've got no guarantee of continuing the research they've started off. You start a project, you spend year 2 applying to your next project, you spend year 2 of that applying to your next project. And so I think there needs to be more of a conversation around how we actually attract people so they want to do the work here.
Right. Okay. And then there were some questions. Yes. We've got that's right. The gentleman with the there, and then we'll have 2 in the front row. Yep.
Hi, I'm Ehsan Masood, also from Nature, 2 for 1. I am looking at the news from the NATO summit, and I'm like despairing with the US pullout and the pressure on NATO member public budgets to increase defense spending. Does that mean science is under pressure? How do we protect science budgets? Any thoughts?
Right. And then there was I think at the end of the row.
Hi,
Yep.
Claire Thorne, Deep Science Ventures and FST Council. I suppose just to extend the football analogy a little further, on the training side, the question from the back, what happens in the Premier League and the football system, the ecosystem, is that they have intentional talent pathways. They start young and they're regional. And that is what we're absolutely missing in science. And then those players are hypermobile. They move around the world and they're encouraged to do so. My question or comment really is to Peter on the translation piece. You mentioned that in your opening remarks that we haven't cracked it. Absolutely. George and I co-chaired a roundtable at number 10 in 2022 on venture science, this idea that you can intentionally create scalable companies. And we were urging consensus then. We're 4 years on, we still don't have an individual, a department, a funding mechanism to back UK venture science. And so the work we're doing on that at Deep Science Ventures is now gone from being UK homegrown to being backed by the ARIA equivalent in Germany.
Thank you very much. And then along here. Yep.
Thanks. Tracy Brown, Sense About Science. 30 years ago, Bridget Ogilvie, the late Bridget Ogilvie, held in her hands the world's biggest cheque, 2.4 billion, which the Wellcome Trust came into after sale of shares, and leveraged with that from Gordon Brown a deal that has actually ended up lasting 30 years to rectify the UK's absolutely abhorrent infrastructure in its universities. It was just dreadful, and that changed, and we're living off that, right? Because that's not going to happen again. Such a deal will not be leveraged from government. The coffers are empty. The business plan must work, surely. All good things that everybody wants to ask for must come from somewhere else, because that isn't money to be leveraged right now. You can try and hang on to a few things. What worries me is that we perhaps, in looking through this, that we're in a very short span in terms of identifying opportunities, because as you diminish what's available, you start to, I mean, overseas, I think development is the example here. You start to diminish the ability of people like Bridget Ogilvie to have the guts to fund things like the Sanger Centre and put the UK at the forefront of the genomics revolution, right? You start to lose people's ability. I mean, overseas aid then gets spent in wasteful ways, for example, because you don't have people with the insight to know where it's best spent. So you start to lose the talent spot and the conversion. And I think that's what I could see happening, what's happened with overseas development becoming a problem. We've got to live off the base we've got. But I think you're going to start to lose the ability to make smart and bold decisions. And we're going to be grubbing around looking for the brown paper and string answer for everything.
All right. Well, that's a very powerful challenge. And we're now going to hear from our panelists. And I think in a way, it strikes a chord with me, because I think there are some very difficult trade-offs here. And there's an important role for the Select Committee, including that in bringing out what the trade-offs are. And if I may add a couple of personal observations about what they are. I think that within the ODA development budget, now so shrunken, sadly, that the trade-offs are not currently very acute, but there was always a lively debate between the people who basically wanted the money to go to the poorest people in the poorest countries, and the people who also thought that ODA spend could go to ODA countries that were actually emerging powers. And there was an educational version of that, which was the pure DFID people wanted to focus on primary school education. And I can still remember the South African minister, Naledi Pandor, being absolutely clear how furious she was that we were not funding universities. And she thought we had deprived Africa of a crucial asset by putting all the money into primary education and not sustaining African universities. And that, I get a hint in the report of, there are several references to emerging powers and emerging countries, and the balance between, let's put it very crudely, how much you give to Niger and how much you focus on Indonesia is a real trade-off, because you can't do everything. And I detected a sort of quite deep hidden, but sort of hints that emerging countries mattered. And the other trade-off is exactly where resources go. And I think the report has got several, in some places, a correct sense of exasperation with the amount of strategy documents we've had. We don't actually need, I think, any more strategy documents. We need specific roadmaps with budgets. And Peter, I may say so, perhaps thinking back to the very first allocation for quantum, there are a device such as a technology roadmap is a very good way of working out actually where you spend the money. And the whole mood, the reality, the realism of Britain's current fiscal constraints is all of this is about trade-offs, and identifying the trade-offs between things, all of which are desirable, is really important, and is a challenge facing ministers at the moment. So let's work along the panel, and some of your observations were very relevant, and panelists pick up on the areas you particularly want to comment on. Charlotte, starting with you.
Great, thanks. So first, the question on science diplomacy. I think fundamentally, if you look at the contested world that we live in, if you look at the scale of challenges that the world faces, we need science diplomacy more now than previously. And I think it's how do you have that diplomacy that's targeted on some of the key agendas? And that might be working together to tackle major challenges to make progress. It might be how do we collectively agree how we regulate and make AI safe. There are many areas where we need to talk with others. And it's so how do we deploy that diplomatic skills and the expertise that you need alongside that, focused on some of the major agendas, and there are many agendas. And I think we've heard from the conversation of the new different types of alliances and links between countries that now we need to work with because of the diversity of the science expertise, but also because we have to be pragmatic. Who are the partners who think like us and where we need to work together on a particular agenda? I think the second point is just on the issue of funding. And you were mentioning about the importance of philanthropy, of welcome, amongst others. I think when we're thinking about science funding, it's very easy to go into what is government doing about, but clearly science needs to be pooling resource and investments from government, from the private sector, as well as philanthropy. As a philanthropy, our aim is how do we be catalytic? So, for example, we partner with government on HDRS, a major initiative of how do we bring together the UK's health data and create opportunities to learn, to support the development of the life science sector, building on that data. We won't stay in there forever, but we are happy to take a risk to move early, to incubate actually HDRS so the UK can move quickly. So I think when you're thinking about those collaborations, it's understanding what do different players bring to that table and making the most of that, but having those relationships and conversations to make that spark work. And then thirdly, on the issue of just research, on the UK attitude around science, I think when you poll the UK population, actually, the UK population still trusts in science and they trust scientists. They rank much more highly than politicians, for example. But I think we can't take that for granted. And for us, it's as scientists, how do we communicate? How do we talk about what you get from science, but also be clear about the scientific process? We might change our mind. We might be very confident about some aspects of science and less confident about other. So I think it's how do we have a mature relationship with the public on science that actually exposes in a way, the way that the science process works, but also sometimes we don't have all the answers and actually we should be listening and engaging in an intelligent way.
Right, I'm going to start where you just left off. Some of you will remember, if you're in life sciences, the big problem we had with animal rights extremists. So I had to lead our work on that. Much of the civil service wouldn't touch it. I was given 2 officials at what was it, the DTI, and 1 at the Home Office. And quite frankly, the biggest thing that changed people's mind around animal testing for medical research was scientists themselves. And I'm going to tell you right now, the way you engage is it's going to have to be you. It's not about me saying how great science is. It's about you showing the enthusiasm you showed today around the different things. And congratulations for getting the cover of Nature. And that's amazing. And I was trying to look at it, but if you can share it around with all of us, it's fantastic. But science is exciting. And so back then we were doing things like the People's Petition, and we were training up different scientists, and we were finding people that could advocate, science students and stuff. But the reality is my strategy was to make sure politicians spoke about it the least amount as possible, and that the discussions were being led by scientists themselves. And so you'll see very little of our fingerprints on all of the stuff that happened, but we were all over that. If you want to make science, again, part of the national discourse, it's going to have to come from you. And it's going to have to come from you, I'm afraid, on TikTok and YouTube and all those places where people actually engage now with their news and their information. And jump into those controversies around vaccines, around 3G masks, around the things that are being pushed that are ridiculous. But jump into it. You might say, oh, God, I did that when I was in my first year of my PhD, for my degree, my BSc. Your voice is what's going to change and engage. So I would just say you need to do it, and that will increase public support. And when cuts happen and choices happen, they have to happen. The other thing I would just say is on science infrastructure partnerships, I'm not as down as you are in terms that it's never going to happen again, because everyone said that we would never get the Crick Centre built. Everyone said it would never, ever happen. And it's only through the determination of people like the minister I was working for, David Sainsbury and Wellcome and others, that it happened. And it was thought there wasn't money at the beginning. There was money at the end. So we think big, and if it's a good idea and you have the right people involved, you will get it done. And then finally, I just need to disagree with you in terms of ODA. ODA, when we put the 0.7 through Parliament, everyone rushed to say that their project was ODA because they thought it would get them more funding. The reality is not everything that was listed as ODA was ODA. We have to have other funding mechanisms whereby the research councils themselves are saying this partnership is valid science with an emerging nation or with an established nation, that doesn't need to be listed as ODA, and the 0.3% isn't a cap, and you need to tell research councils that over and over and over again. Yes, it might have been registered under ODA before, but it shouldn't stop being funded now, because actually it should never have been listed as ODA in the first place. Thanks.
Falls under the OECD definition of ODA. It's ODA, and DFID is not the custodian of that. Can I just ask you a question, which is, you very powerfully and correctly argue that the scientist voice needs to be heard. Are you concerned that the Cabinet Office guidelines on scientists within the public sector going on the media is making it much harder for a large number of scientists to participate in the public debate?
100%. And the fact that we are now talking about defense is finally on the public agenda. There's nothing that keeps us safer than our science, whether it's quantum, whether it's drones, whether it's latest capabilities in terms of our military. And I know we don't all like to talk about it in those contexts, but now is the time. And yes, And I think you should talk about it as much as you can, and we'll try and get the rules changed.
One of the frustrations, NASA absolutely shaping the debate, because people working for NASA can all go on the media. Working for the UK Space Agency, you couldn't go on the media. It was absolutely a rule not to say, and which holds us back from doing exactly what you rightly call for us to do. Peter, over to you.
Couple of things. On defence, there's a real issue in emerging technology with the delays to the defence investment plan. The dip has actually, that delay has really influenced things, and in particular, urgent operational requirements is really taken away the edge that we might have had in looking at future technology or next generation technologies on this one. And I do worry a great deal about that. A lot of the budget that used to be part of the MOD CSA has now been transferred to the National Armaments Directorship, and there's a lot of uncertainty. They're also the UK owner of Pillar 2 and Pillar 1 of AUKUS, where a lack of progress has actually meant that our Australian colleagues are now talking to the US rather than to us. Okay, so that's the dip is something that really worries me. Position navigation and timing is a critically important thing, and we're stalled. Okay, right. I chaired the work for the Cabinet Office on PNT, and I really worry about it. I call it my Sisyphus committee. Right. On a more cheerful note, last year was the International Year of Quantum. Okay, I chaired it for the United Nations and UNESCO, and in particular looking after the global events. We had 1.2 million separate attendees at events we organized during that year. Now, given that it's quantum and a fairly male-dominated field, we were delighted when we did the audit that 42% of those separate participants were female, and very much more focused on the global south. That kind of activity actually is an example of soft power, of the way that we actually engage with the world. It was a bit of a nightmare that year for me, but it was really worthwhile. And we ended up with a celebration in Ghana about what we'd actually achieved and what we could build on in the future, working with countries right around the world who wanted to take part in this adventure, who otherwise probably didn't have a voice. So that's my positive statement. On the negative one, I do worry a lot about the dip.
Thanks, David. Brilliant questions. Thank you to the FST. This is a really quality audience and debate. I want to deal with a few and then share a horror story, just to remind us all. Okay, it's a funny story. Andy, I thought, asked a brilliant question about the bilateral alignment. When, after doing Horizon, we went off to do Japan, Canada, Switzerland, it was a very simple framework because there's lots of great collaborations going on. And all I did was to go, well, hang on, let's have 3 pillars: research, industry innovation, and third pillar, sovereignty and security. It was a bottom-up process of asking the research councils, the Royal Societies in each country, what are the things that we and Japan really knock the ball out of the park on, or in Switzerland. And the idea is very simple. You can then vertically stack them. So you now have vertical pillars of where do we have really strong research? And in quantum, there are a number of countries where we have really strong elements of quantum alignment. So it's a matrix. So it's not just a bilateral. It's a series of bilaterals that should be aligned in pursuit of a broader strategy. And it's not easy, but it is not impossible if you've got a commanding, sensible, coherent mind in Whitehall. Charlotte asked a brilliant question about metrics. And as Emily knows, I'm obsessed with metrics and the select committee because it's very easy to talk about science and say, oh, it's brilliant with this, with that. But actually, our report, Flying Blind, just reminds government, look, you're deploying 84 billion, brilliant, over 4 years. What are the metrics of success that we can use to show reform? We're not wasting money. And I think Patrick Balance has done us a favor by saying, look, there's basically 3 buckets: excellence, growth for everyone, not just Cambridge, and thirdly, sovereign, secure missions. But they need to be translated into some outcomes. And it's a brilliant question. I'll give you 3. Supply chain resilience. We could take a few areas like quantum and say, okay, we have got to make sure we're resilient. Co-investment, Liz Kendall, when we asked, said that is the key metric of are we turning quite small UK money into global impact. And thirdly, I think early career fellowships. And I think the visa ball drop was huge. If we're increasing the number of young international career scientists coming here, that is good for science diplomacy. Brilliant question about the difference of 1947 and now. I mean, it seems to me 47 was a Cold War. We went into a Cold War in which American tech dominance, and we basically rode on the back of the Americans. Then we had globalization after 89, easy days of just the world's going to get richer. And then we've now got China and MAGA. And we're in a totally different environment. And that's what this committee is calling for, a more muscular, robust response. I really fear the dropping of science. I'm worried DCIT's becoming an AI department, not the science department. And my horror story, funny story, is twice as minister, we had the expo, the global expo, and every time the Treasury try and stop the UK having a pavilion, they say it's a waste of money. And twice the minister rang me and said, help, can you help us? And I said, yeah, we should have a pavilion at Japan. I mean, we can't promise to be a global science superpower and set science in the integrated review and not. So they said, well, it's very expensive and construction rates in Japan are very expensive. I said, why don't we build a hemisphere here, put it on a boat and show the world what we're doing in space and celestial, in terrestrial and oceanic. Don't have a little come and visit London tech cheap thing, which is what we did. The fish and chips were good. The beer was good. The Japanese pavilion was devoted to the bioeconomy and inspired people with what is possible. And I just think we miss a trick. We don't realize how important this is.
Thanks, Emily. Emily's got to go. Thank you very much, George. Thank you to all of our excellent panelists. And there have been some very frank and useful messages about things we've got to do better, prompted by this really good report. If you want to drown your sorrows, drinks are available. On the other hand, if you want to celebrate British success, you can also go and have a drink with us. And science diplomacy is a great national asset, and we all celebrate it. Thank you very much.